When you're programming in the real world, it'll often be the case that you want to perform the same set of actions over and over again a certain number of times. Let's say you want to print something to screen 20 times. You want to add 1 to a number 50 times. Same action a certain number of times. In such situations, if you know upfront how many times you want to execute that action, you will use for loops. We'll start off working with lists first because that's where for loops are the most intuitive. Let's say we have a list of tech companies: Google, Apple, Facebook, Uber, and Intel. If we print this out, you'll get it as a list. Now, what if we want to iterate through every element in a list? Iterating through elements in a list basically means we want to access individual elements in the list one after the other in order. Can do this using a for loop. For company in tech companies. For every company in the tech companies list, perform an action, and that action is to print the name of that company. There are some familiar elements here in this statement. First is the use of the colon, indicating that all statements which come after the for statement belong to the for block. After the colon, when you see the indentation of the print statement, you know that the print statement comes under the for block. This for loop will print the name of every tech company in the tech companies list. The very first time this for loop is executed, the company variable will take the value Google. That's the first element in the list. And when you say print company, Google will be printed to screen. All the companies in the tech companies list haven't been explored yet. There are still companies left. The for loop will not end. Instead, it will continue executing. This time, the company variable will take on the value of the next company in the list, which is Apple. So company is equal to Apple in the second iteration. Once the second iteration is complete, the for loop will once again check whether we've reached the end of the list. We clearly haven't. It'll execute once again for the third iteration. This time, the company variable will take the value Facebook. The print function prints Facebook to screen. Once the loop block has been executed, which at this point in time contains just a single print statement, the for loop will once again check to see whether we've reached the end of the list. We haven't. So the company variable then takes on the next value in the list, that is Uber. Uber is now printed to screen. Once again, the for loop checks. Have we reached the end of the list? Nope. We continue. The company variable will now contain Intel in the fifth and the last iteration. Intel will be printed to screen. The for loop now has iterated through all the elements of the list. It has reached the very last element. There's nowhere further to go. The loop will now be terminated and we get out of the for loop. Let's get some more practice iterating over the elements in a list. This time we'll set up a list of numbers 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50 in the sum numbers list. The for loop is set up in exactly the same manner as before. For num in sum numbers, colon, print the number is and the number. The for loop then iterates through every element in the list and prints it out to screen. The exact steps of the iteration are exactly the same as when we iterated over the tech companies. This ability that we now have to iterate over all elements in a list is very powerful indeed, because now we can do some interesting stuff with this. Let's find the sum of all values in the sum numbers list. This is the for loop that we'll set up to do so. The first step is to initialize the variable total to 0. This will hold the sum total of all the numbers in the list. We then set up the for loop to iterate over every number in the list. Each time a new number from the list is assigned to the num variable, and then within the for loop we'll add num to the current running total. Total is equal to total plus num. In order to help us debug and see how the progression goes, for every iteration of the for loop, I'm going to print out the current value of the total. And here is the result. At the end of the first for loop iteration, the total is 10, that is after the first element was added. After the second iteration, the total is 30, that is 10 plus 20 is equal to 30. In the third iteration, we have total is equal to 30 and the new number is 30. So 30 plus 30 is equal to 60. and so on till at the very end we get 150. 10 plus 20 plus 30 plus 40 plus 50 is equal to 150. Instead of printing the running total at every step, you can simply set up the for loop to calculate the total, and you can print the final total value at the very end outside of the for loop. Notice something interesting here. I want the print statement to be outside of the for block. This I achieve by specifying the indentation. Notice that the indentation of the print statement is not the same as the indentation of total is equal to total plus num, which means total is equal to total plus num is within the for loop. The print statement is outside of the for loop. The print statement will be executed exactly once after the for loop has iterated over every element in the list and calculated the total. Remember that before we calculated the sum total of all the elements in the list, we initialized total to 0. Now let's say we change this initialization. Instead, we initialize the total variable to 100. We'll get the sum of all elements in the list plus 100. That is the initial value of total. Just like we calculated the sum of numbers in the list, we can use the for loop to count the number of elements in any list. This time we'll initialize the variable count to 0. We'll iterate over all the numbers in the list, and for each number we'll increment our counter by 1. Here we don't actually care about what the number is in the list. We just want to increment by 1 each time we encounter an element in the list. And here is the result printed after the for loop has executed. The total length of our array or list is 5. This is possibly the first time that I've used the term array within this course. An array is simply a list. An array is a list of elements in some order. As far as this introductory Python course is concerned, you can treat arrays and lists as one and the same thing. Python has a built-in range function which generates numbers within a certain range. A range is basically a start number and an end number. Python generates all numbers within that range. Range of 5 basically refers to the numbers between 0 and 5, where 5 is not included. The most common use case of this range function is essentially in a for loop. So you can say for I in range 5 print I. This will print all numbers in that range, which is essentially 0 through 4. Notice that the input argument to the range function is 5. 5 is not included in the range. The range is from 0 through 4. Here is another example of the range function. For I in range 10, I will take on values from 0 through 9. 10 is not included. If you don't have a list to iterate through, but you want to perform a certain set of actions some number of times, let's say 7 times, you can use the range function. For I in range 7, will execute the for loop 7 times. For loops can be used with dictionaries as well. Let's set up a dictionary that we are familiar with. These are the math scores of 4 students. Let's use a for loop to iterate over the keys in the dictionary. For item in math scores, print item. Item will take on values of the keys that are present in the math scores dictionary: Ram, Kumar, Kishan, and Natasha. The 4 keys in the dictionary are what is printed to screen, the names of the 4 students. Now, the very last print statement is what is the most interesting here. The item variable retains the value of the last item in the list, which in our list is the name Natasha. While the for loop is being executed, the item variable will take on values Ram, Kumar, Kishan, and Natasha in some order. The order is not determined. After the for loop has finished executing, the item variable will retain the last value that was stored in it. It so happens to be Natasha here, which is why the item variable contains Natasha. Remember when we studied dictionaries, we spoke about the keys function on dictionaries, which returns a list of keys. We can iterate over these list of keys as well. For key in mathscores.keys, print key. This will print out all the keys that are present in the dictionary. And then finally, the last print statement will print the last value that was stored in the key variable, which once again here is the key Natasha. If you want to iterate over the values present in a dictionary, this is how you'll do it for val in mathscores.values. Only dictionary values are printed to screen. If you want to iterate over the contents in a dictionary and print out both the keys and the corresponding values, here is one way to do it. We iterate over math scores. We iterate over only the keys, and then we print the key, access the corresponding value using the square brackets, and print that out as well. We get the key from the iterating variable and we look up the value. And here is the output. An easy way to access both the key and the value at the same time without having to do the lookup is to use the items function. Remember that the items function returns a list of tuples where every tuple is a key value pair. And here is every item of our dictionary printed to screen. Every item is a tuple, as you can clearly see. If you want to extract the individual key and value from the tuple, you can do this by iterating using two variables. Key comma value will hold the key and the value in each of the item tuples. The key will hold the first field in the tuple, which is the key. The value will hold the second field in the tuple, which is the value. And here it is, key value pairs printed to screen. Now, it's possible when you're iterating through a for loop, you might encounter a condition where you say, I want to just stop here. I don't want to go through any more loop iterations. In such situations, you would choose to use the break keyword. Break keyword is used to bail out of a loop before all iterations have been complete. It's a way to cut short the loop execution. In this example statement here, we use the range 5 function to iterate over the loop 5 times. But after printing out the very first value of I, we want to break out of the loop. We want to stop the execution of the loop. This we do using the break command. When you run this, you'll find the loop executes exactly once when the value of I is assigned 0 and then it stops. Only 0 is printed to screen. Break statements are typically used with some kind of conditional check. So here we have the same loop once again. We want to iterate over the loop statements 5 times and we want to print out the value of I. We do a conditional check here. If I gets the value 3, if I is equal to 3, we want to break out of this for loop. We want to stop executing this for loop. And when you run the statement, you'll see that I will take on the values 0, 1, 2, 3. The loop continues till I is equal to 3 and then stops executing. Let's practice the break statement a little more. Here we have a loop we want to execute 10 times. For I in range 10, we print out the value of I. We have a conditional check in there though. If I is greater than 5, we want to break out of this loop. So we are actually cutting this loop short as soon as I is greater than the value 5. Execute this and you'll see that I takes on the value 0 through 6. 6 is printed first and then we have the conditional check. 6 is greater than 5. It's only after 6 is printed that we break out of the loop. Let's try something a little different. This is the exact same set of statements as before, except that the print statement has been moved to be after the conditional check for I greater than 5. This will change the results that are printed. Notice that I values from 0 through 5 are printed. I gets the value 6, the conditional check is evaluated first, and we break out of the for loop without executing the print statement. Here is a for loop that's a little different. The first difference is in the range function. Here the range is from 1 to 10. The range will start with the value 1 and go on to 9. 10 is not included. Within the for loop, we use the if statement to check whether I is perfectly divisible by 5. If yes, then we break out of the for loop. If not, we continue with the for loop and print the value of I. Try and see if you can guess what the output here will be. Think about it. All right. The I values from 0 to 4 will be printed. When I gets the value 5, the condition will evaluate to true because 5 is perfectly divisible by 5. The remainder is 0. The break statement in the if block will be executed and we'll break out of the loop. Let's try a slightly different variation here. We want to iterate over all companies in the tech companies list and print out the company's name. Now, if the company happens to be Uber, we want to give the user some additional information. We'll print out the company has not been listed yet, and then we want to stop iterating over the rest of the companies. We want to break out of the loop. And here is the result of this iteration. We print out Google, Apple, Facebook. When the company variable gets the value Uber, the if statement evaluates to true. We print out this company is not listed yet, and then we break out of the for loop. We do not execute the last iteration where the company name would have been Intel. The one thing to observe in this output is that Uber is first printed to screen and then we break out of the loop. The print statement is before the if conditional check. There is another interesting command that you can use within loops, and that is the continue statement. The continue statement basically says, I'm not interested in executing the rest of this particular iteration, just move on to the next iteration, but continue with the loop. The continue statement is a way for you to say, I want to skip the current iteration. I don't really want to process this element. I want to move on to the next element in the list or the next item in the loop. Let's analyze this for loop with a continue statement here. We iterate over every company in the tech companies list. If the company is equal to Uber, if the company name matches, we'll print out this company is not listed yet, and we will then continue. Continue basically implies that the remaining statements in this iteration of the for loop, that is the print company statement, will not be executed. Instead, the for loop control will move on to the beginning of the next iteration. It'll start processing the Intel company. The company variable will be assigned Intel. Here are the results from this for loop. This should help you make more sense of it. Notice that the first time company takes on the value Google, Google is printed to screen, then Apple, and then Facebook. When the company variable gets the value Uber, the if statement evaluates to true. We go into the if block, we print out the company is not listed yet, and then we continue. The remaining print statement where we print out the name of the company is skipped altogether. We go back to the next for loop iteration and then print out Intel. Here is another for loop which helps demonstrate how the continue statements work. Here we are iterating from range 1 to 8. I will take on values 1 through 7. And then we have a print statement before the continue statement, which prints out the value of I. And we have a print statement after the continue statement, which once again prints out the value of I. Between these two statements is an if conditional check. If I modulo 2 is 0, if I is an even number, then we continue. When we continue, we won't execute any statements after the continue. We won't execute the print which comes after the continue statement. And here is the result of this loop. Let's properly analyze this result and see if it makes sense to us. When I takes on the value 1, 1 is an odd number. So we have the print before the continue statement. That will be there for all numbers. The if condition will evaluate to false, which means we won't call the continue command. That means we move on to the next statement within the for loop, the print after the continue statement. When I gets the value 2, the first print is executed before the continue statement. That's why I is equal to 2 is printed there. The if condition evaluates to true, which means the continue statement will be executed. The print which says after the continue statement will not be executed. We move on to the next iteration of the loop, which means there is exactly one print statement when I is equal to 2. Because of the continue, all even numbers are printed exactly once, all odd numbers are printed twice. Here is some more practice for you using the continue statement. I is in range 1 to 31, which means I takes on values 1 through 30, including 30. Now, if I is divisible by 5, we'll say I is a multiple of 5. That's what will be printed. In all other cases, we'll simply continue. The result of this execution will only print multiples of 5 and yes with an exclamation for every multiple of 5. In all other cases, we simply move on to the beginning of the next iteration. Our discussion of for loops isn't complete till we've seen an example of a nested loop. A nested loop is basically one for loop within an other. Here, the outer loop is the I loop for I in range 1, 5. The inner loop is for j in the list which comprises of A, B, C, and D. Here is how nested loops work. For every iteration of the outer loop, when I is equal to value 1, for example, the inner loop is executed completely. When I is equal to 1, j will take on values a, b, c, and d. The inner j for loop is now complete. We now come to the outer loop once again. I will now have the value 2. Once again, the inner loop starts from the very beginning. J will take on values A, B, C, and D in turn. The inner loop is now complete. We go back to the outer loop. I will now have value 3. The inner loop starts from the beginning and this continues till finally the outer loop is complete as well. For each time we print out I comma j. Notice the value of I is 1 and j takes on values a, b, c, d. When value of I is 2, once again j starts off with a and takes on the values b, c, d, and so on.